Have you ever kept a family secret for decades? I won't ask what, just curious.
You know that moment when your phone lights up and, for a second, you think it might be something normal or kind or at least neutral, and then you read the words and feel that slow, dull sting settle in because the person who sent it did not just skip the filter. They bypass the basic respect people give to acquaintances, let alone family, and you are left standing there with a sentence that keeps echoing, and you try to brush it off, but it keeps circling back like a bad slogan. That was me. When my cousin Marla texted that the holiday brunch was for high achievers only, as if she were doing me a favor by explaining the updated criteria for entry into her little hall of mirrors. I stared at the message, reread it once, twice, and then put the phone face down like that would change the reality that someone I grew up with had decided to make a tradition about celebrating everyone's year into a velvet rope thing where she gets to be the bouncer. And I get to be the lesson about standards. I am not going to pretend I laughed it off, because I didn't. I paced a little, I sat, I stood. I tried to tell myself she probably meant it as a joke, but the truth is she has said versions of the same thing for years in more polite wrappers. And anyone who has lived with a person like that knows the pattern, the smile that comes with a compliment that is not really a compliment, the public toast that mentions your effort and then slides into a punchline about how some people are still finding their path. And yes, I have apparently been finding my path since the era of flip phones, according to Marla. I did not respond, which for me was not just silence, it was a line in the sand, because the old me would have tried to keep it nice. Would have sent a self-deprecating joke or a thumbs up and lived with the small humiliation in exchange for keeping the family chat from catching fire. But something in me decided I was done with negotiating my own value like it was a coupon that needed to be redeemed before it expired. So I set the phone aside and I opened my laptop, and I told myself I would put my energy where it might actually do something for me instead of feeding someone else's appetite for hierarchy dressed up as tradition. There is a specific kind of shame that comes with being told, in plain language, that you do not meet the bar, even when you know the bar is fake and movable, and if you let it, it curdles into anger that eats your day. So I gave it a job. I told that feeling to sit next to me while I worked and to be quiet until I needed it, because I had something on my screen that mattered more than a gate with a cousin holding a clipboard. Here is what I did not tell Marla, and what I have not told most of my family, because I learned the hard way that some people only clap when the applause bounces back on them. For years I have been the unglamorous person who keeps a complicated project moving. The one who sits in the meetings no one wants and translates chaos into decisions. And while the job title looks ordinary, the thing we have been building has real heft, the kind of thing that gets tested and audited and questioned by people who do not care about your feelings. And for the past year I have been living with confidential emails and tangled timelines, and that low hum of stress that only shuts off when you finally ship. I do not say this to make myself sound noble. I say it because that morning, while Marla was formatting place cards and assigning prestige to frittatas, I had an email at the top of my inbox with a subject line that included the word confidential and a sender whose name, if I texted it to the family thread, would make every last one of them drop their forks. When I say I chose not to reply, I do not mean I ignored the whole thing. I made a different kind of reply, one that did not use words, because I pulled up the family group chat, muted it for a year, archived the last 12 months of photos that had been taken mostly to be posted, moved the thread to a folder I never check, and then I went into my calendar and blocked off the brunch hours with a single line that said focus time, which might not sound like revenge. But if you have ever been trained to serve your dignity in bite sizes to keep peace, reclaiming your time is a small, clean strike that lands right where it should. I also opened LinkedIn, adjusted one quiet line in my profile so that my role on the project was described clearly and accurately instead of in the vague, polite way I used before, and I toggled my visibility so that if anyone searched my name that week, they would see the reality I had been keeping small out of habit, not out of truth. I took a breath and clicked on that confidential email, because even though my hands were shaking a little from the text and the old instincts that tell you to fix feelings by smoothing them, the subject line was the only thing that deserved my attention. And inside, I found the kind of message you screenshot and save and read twice more just to be sure you are not inventing optimism out of wishful thinking. A message that closed with next steps and a timeline that did not stretch into someday, but sat firmly on today. And as I scrolled, I felt the weirdest calm wash in, not because I wanted to crush anyone, but because I realized I did not have to argue with a gatekeeper about whether I belonged when the map I was holding led me to a different door entirely. I will tell you the rest, but first let me say this, because it matters to how I moved forward. I did not decide to beat them at their own game, since their game is about applause and seeding charts and who gets tagged. And mine is about building something that works when no one is looking. So my choice that day was not to escalate the insult or send a cutting reply or forward the text to my mother for a round of sympathetic horror. My choice was to let the silence do what it does best when paired with momentum, which is to create space for the reality to show up on its own, and I cannot explain how good it felt to hold that boundary without a speech. And then, right there, just as I was considering whether to share the news with anyone or keep it locked down until the official release, my screen blinked with a new notification from our communications lead. And the subject line made my heart kick once and then settle. Interview opportunity for tonight. Embargo lifts at 8. Are you available? I had not planned revenge. The calendar planned it for me, and in that moment I knew my response to Marla's message would not be a paragraph or a clever line. It would be something she would have to watch without interrupting, and I leaned back, let myself smile for maybe 5 seconds, and began writing the talking points I would need, because if they were going to draw a line around what counts as achievement, I was going to redraw the map without asking permission, and believe me, that decision tasted better than any fancy brunch I have ever been invited to. I wish I could tell you that the hours between that message and the evening interview passed in a blur of confidence and focus, but the truth is they moved the way hours move when you are trying not to think about something and you keep catching yourself thinking about it anyway. So I did the only thing that has ever settled me when the noise gets loud, which is to sit down, open the work, and give my brain a task that asks for full attention. And while everyone else in my family was clinking glasses and arranging their plates just so, I was at my kitchen table with a plate of leftovers that I ate cold without ceremony, clicking through a checklist I had written months ago for exactly this moment, a list that was boring and practical and, as it turned out, the most reliable friend I had that day. The family thread kept pinging with photos even though I had muted it earlier, because people find ways around settings when they want to be seen, and my name showed up in a few captions in that tone that sounds inclusive if you do not know the backstory, but reads like a performance when you do, and every time my screen lit up, I reminded myself that I did not need to win the comment section of a private chat. I needed to keep the promise I had made to the team and to the version of myself who was tired of being told her lane by people who did not build anything but seeding charts. The call from my boss came just after noon, his voice doing that upbeat calm he uses when the stakes are high and the path is clear, and he said the words I had been waiting to hear in a steady rhythm. Approved for public release. Embargo lifts at 8. The station wants you specifically, and before he could ask if I was comfortable, I said I was available because I knew that if I left even a sliver of hesitation in the air, someone would offer to take this off my plate in the name of helping. And I was not going to let helpfulness erase me from the one place my name belonged without argument. A minute later, our communications lead emailed with logistics, and tucked underneath the address and the timing and the notes about what not to disclose was a simple ask I had almost forgotten they always include. Please send 2 or 3 names of local organizations or community leaders we should tag when we post the clip, which most people treat like an afterthought, but for me on that particular day, it felt like a lever I could pull without making a speech or starting a fight. I sat there thinking about who actually shows up for the kind of work we do, not the people who take photos with the finished thing, but the people who keep the lights on and the permits moving and the training happening. And then I started a small list that was both honest and, I will admit, strategically satisfying, because I put the chamber first, not out of spite, but because they had given us space and introductions when we needed them. And I knew for a fact that my cousin follows every one of their posts like they are a personal scoreboard. I added the City Innovation Office because two of their analysts had stayed late on a weeknight to untangle a mess that could have delayed us for months. And finally, I included the local business association that just happens to count the brunch venue as a highlight member, since they love to share any mention of their partners, especially when those partners are named on television. And I wrote it all in a polite note that thanked people for real support, not pretend support, and hit send with a calm I did not expect to feel. It was not cruel, and it was not a gotcha. It was simply using the tools I had to make sure the right people saw the right thing at the right time, and if certain cousins caught a glimpse of their own reflection in that window, that was between them and the mirror. After that, I opened my profile and built out a short post that would go live the moment the embargo lifted. Nothing flashy, just a clear statement of what we had achieved and gratitude for the team. And I toggled the setting that notifies your network because I've learned that silence is not the same as humility, and I scheduled it for a few minutes after 8 so the clip would have time to hit the station's page first. I also texted Dana, who runs the neighborhood group where everyone pretends not to watch each other, and asked if she would cue a simple update for that evening pointing to the segment. No commentary, no bragging, just the link and the gist. And she wrote back that she already had a draft because apparently someone on the station's social team had posted an afternoon teaser graphic with my name on it, which I had not seen because I was trying to keep my head down, and when she sent me the screenshot, I will not lie, I felt the smallest flicker of satisfaction that the day had decided to cooperate without me forcing it. The practical stuff grounded me, so I kept going. I printed the talking points so I would not fumble on air and undercut the work with nerves. I sent a quick thank you to our lead engineer who hates cameras but loves precision. And I packed my bag the way you pack when you intend to be your own anchor, nothing extra, just the things that let you keep your focus while strangers point equipment at you. Every so often my phone would buzz with another round of family photos, a cake, a toast, a caption about tradition, and each time I saw one, I thought about all the years I had tried to earn my way into rooms by being smaller, only to realize that their approval came with terms I could never meet, and that maybe I did not want to meet, and that was the quiet, liberating anger that sat next to me while I double-checked the directions to the station and made sure I knew where to park so I would not arrive flustered and give anyone an easy narrative about how women crumble under pressure. Since I promised myself a little clean payback at every step, I added one more move that felt like setting a bone straight, which was to reply to a separate text thread that Marla had created for planning next year's brunch themes by typing a line so polite it almost hummed. Something about wishing them a productive meeting and asking if they could please consider starting future invites with the criteria attached. That way no one would misunderstand what was expected, and then I pressed send and archived the thread, knowing full well that the real message was not in that line but in what would happen later, when people who measure worth in seating arrangements would have to sit with a different kind of seating chart, the one they do not control. By late afternoon my body shifted into that practical calm that shows up when you have done everything you can and the rest is just execution, and I took one last look at the schedule the communications lead had sent. Rehearsed the opening sentence, I want to get right, because it credits the team, not just me, and I walked toward the door feeling the odd mix of nerves and relief that comes when the moment you have been working toward refuses to wait for your mood to catch up. And that is when my phone lit up with a new message from a number I have not saved in years, a number I recognize anyway, the kind of number you do not forget even when you want to, and the text was short and full of entitlement. Saw the promo for tonight, we should talk. Which made me stop on the threshold with my keys in my hand and decide, without hesitation, that whoever wanted a preview would have to do what everyone else was doing this evening, which was to sit down, keep quiet, and watch. Walking into the station felt like walking into any building where people are busy and focused and not interested in your personal drama, which turned out to be exactly what I needed. Because there is something about a place where the clock dictates everything and no one has time to ask if your cousin meant her message as a joke that strips away the noise and leaves you with the one job you came to do. So I checked in, shook hands with the producer who had a clipboard and a kindness that did not spill into small talk, and followed a young assistant down a hallway while reminding myself that I did not have to be perfect. I just had to be clear, and that was enough to slow my pulse back to normal. The anchor met me in the green room for a quick rundown, and she had that tidy, practiced warmth that never feels fake because it serves a purpose, which is to let guests know the boundaries, so she said we had a few minutes. She had read the brief and wanted to hit the why and the how without drowning in jargon. There would be one question about community impact, and if anything came up that I could not discuss due to the embargo details we had already provided, I should simply say we would share more specifics on our site after the broadcast. And when she asked if I was comfortable mentioning team members by role rather than by name to avoid leaving anyone out, I felt a wave of relief because that is how I prefer to do it anyway, and it meant I could stay honest without turning a team into a list. They clipped a mic to my collar, smoothed the wire, and led me to the chair where people say things they cannot take back, which is a thought that used to terrify me and now just makes me very careful. And when the countdown reached the last few beats, I did what I always do before any moment that matters, which is to picture the people who actually built the thing and remind myself that I am their translator, not the star. And then the light was on and the anchor was smiling and saying my name and my title and a sentence that placed our project in the context of the region, and I heard my name the way other people would hear it at home, in their living rooms, in front of their phones, in group chats, in threads where I am often the topic without being present, and that tiny awareness did not rattle me, it steadied me, because the truth, said clearly, defends itself. The questions were fair and direct, and I answered the way you answer when you have lived inside the details for long enough to speak about them without notes, describing the problem we set out to solve in plain language, walking through the practical steps we took, and emphasizing that none of it would have happened without the people who stayed late and argued with care and kept showing up when it would have been easier to point at the hurdles and walk away, and I said the line I had practiced not because it was dramatic but because it was real. That achievement is the work you stand behind when the lights are not on, which is also the work that holds up when the lights finally are, and I said it gently, without directing it at anyone. And still I knew exactly who would hear it like a bell. When the anchor asked about community impact, I kept it grounded, not lofty, talking about the local business owners who had told us what they needed instead of what looked good on paper, about the training partners who had adjusted their schedules to meet workers where they were, and the city staff who had cleared obstacles without asking for their names in a press release, and at the end I thanked the organizations we had already cleared for mention. Knowing the station would tag them and those tags would do exactly what I intended, which was to route the credit to the people who had actually earned it and, incidentally, drop my name in the feeds that my cousin refreshes like a sport. The red light went off. The anchor squeezed my hand and said nice job in a tone that is not performative but professional, and the producer gave me the quick nod that means we are clear, which is television for you did not blow it. And I stepped back into the hall with a calm that felt almost physical, like a weight I had been carrying under the ribcage decided to set itself down and wait outside. My phone, which I had silenced, started vibrating in the bag with the kind of persistence that tells you your name has landed in places where it usually does not, and, because I have learned to let a moment be a moment before I rush in to manage it, I did not dig it out immediately. I signed a release, thanked the assistant who had walked me in, asked a quick follow-up about when the clip would be posted, and only then, while waiting for the elevator, did I check the screen and see the stack of notifications that reads like a weather map before a storm, tags from the chamber, a message from the city office, a short note from our lead engineer, 2 missed calls from my mother, one from a number I recognized as my aunt's, and, sitting stubbornly at the top, a text from Marla that said she had seen the segment and that we should talk tonight. I did not answer, not because I wanted to be cruel, but because I did not want to give her the performance she was expecting, which would have been me rushing to explain or minimize or pretend this was no big deal. So instead I walked to my car, sat for a minute, and scheduled the post I had drafted earlier to publish 5 minutes after the station uploaded the clip, a short, clear message that thanked the team and linked to the news page, with the tags in place so the right people would get the ripple first, and I set my phone to do not disturb for everyone except my boss and the communications lead, because if there was one thing I was not going to do after years of being told to wait my turn, It was to spend the night managing the feelings of people who had just finished a brunch where my name was a punchline. For the last move of the evening, which I will admit was petty in a way that felt like justice rather than cruelty, I set an auto-reply that would go only to numbers not saved in my contacts, and to any calls routed from private numbers, a simple, polite line that said I was unavailable and would follow up tomorrow, with a link to the station's page tucked underneath. And then I set the phone down and let the circulation begin without my hands on the wheel, because sometimes the most effective answer is to let the message stand alone and make people sit with it. The last thing I saw before I closed my eyes that night was a new text from my aunt. Not Marla's mother, but the one who has always watched quietly from the side and then spoken when it mattered, and her message said she had questions, that some things had been said at the brunch that I needed to know about, and to please call her in the morning, which landed like a stone dropping into a still pool, because if there is one person who does not stir the water unless there is something heavy underneath, it is her, and that is where I left it, with the calls piling up, the clip running on repeat in the feeds that never stop, and a question from the one relative who does not dramatize anything, waiting to be answered at sunrise. I woke up before the alarm because the phone had already decided my day for me, and I let it ring for a while since I knew exactly what kind of messages were stacking up. The sudden warmth from people who had decided overnight that my work qualified for conversation, the cousins with their exaggerated pride like they had quietly believed in me all along, and mixed in, the careful notes from colleagues who actually matter. And I made coffee and waited for the one call I knew would carry substance rather than noise, which came from my aunt, the one who never performs and never gossips, who told me in that steady voice of hers that at the brunch Marla had not simply framed the event as high achievers only. She had stood up during a toast and said that some people in the family confuse busyness with results, and it is time to celebrate those who deliver rather than those who make excuses, and that there had been nods and a joke about me finding my footing, and then, more quietly, a comment about how I had declined last year's panel because I was overwhelmed, which was true in the sense that the project was crushing and the panel was an empty photo op, but untrue in the way she used it as proof that I do not show up. And hearing that detail did something simple and clean inside me, not a flaring rage, just a click, the sound of a decision finding its place. My aunt also said there was talk of turning the brunch into a formal series next year, with sponsorships and a theme about excellence, and that Marla had mentioned she was in touch with the chamber and a few partners about doing it at a bigger venue. Which would have been funny if it were not so predictable, the way people slap their names on achievement as if it is a centerpiece you can rent. I thanked my aunt and told her the summary was enough for now, and when we hung up I looked at my calendar and the emails waiting, and there, almost like the day had set it out for me, was a message from the chamber's director, congratulating us on the segment and floating the idea of a winter breakfast highlighting real local projects with measurable outcomes, something the business association was already interested in supporting since the clip had clearly landed. And they wanted to know if I would be willing to help shape it so that the focus was on teams and partnerships rather than individuals, and whether I could give a short talk about the process we used. And I sat there smiling in a way that had nothing to do with vanity because this was the exact conversation I had always wanted, one about systems and people and results, not about seating charts and who wore what and whose name got printed first. I called the director rather than replying by email, and I said that if they wanted an event that actually honored work, we should make it open, priced low, with scholarship seats for small businesses that usually get left out, and that we should put the emphasis on the case studies and create a way for attendees to commit to a partnership on the spot, a simple pledge board with follow-up built in so it was not just a breakfast, but a pipeline of action. And as I laid it out, he said, "This is exactly the conversation we hoped for. Can you consult on the framework?" And I said yes, as long as we credit the teams and keep individual branding light, and he laughed and said, "You are speaking my language." Here is the part that will sound like a movie to some people and like Tuesday to anyone who has ever moved pieces quietly. The venue they proposed for the breakfast was the same place the brunch has used for years, and the date they had in mind was the same weekend. Since the chamber wanted to catch the energy of people being in town, and the director asked if there were any conflicts he should know about before they placed a hold, and I paused for one long second, not to hesitate, but to mark the moment. And then I said the morning slot would be ideal because it leaves the rest of the day free for people with families, which was me being practical and also precise in a way that made me feel like the universe had set out a clean table. I offered to introduce him to the City Innovation Office and the training partners so they could be featured instead of me, and I suggested a small panel format where I would moderate and ask the questions that usually get lost under the clapping, and he loved it, and by the end of the call he said he would send an initial hold confirmation and a draft announcement for feedback, and could I also provide a short quote for the release, something about collaborative outcomes over credit, and I said absolutely. I will send it within the hour. While I waited for his email, the floodgates opened on the family side as expected, long messages about pride and how they always knew I had it in me and how it would be great to hear more about the project at next year's brunch. And then the inevitable text from Marla, who went with a version of accountability theater that would have fooled me 5 years ago, a paragraph about poor phrasing and how she never meant to exclude me personally, and how she was actually trying to motivate people by setting high standards, and could we talk about me headlining the brunch next year, because it would mean a lot to everyone, and she was already speaking with sponsors who would love to feature my story. I read it twice, not because it deserved the time, but because I wanted to choose my next move with surgical accuracy rather than heat, and then I called her, because some messages should be delivered live. And I kept my voice even and friendly and said I had heard about the toasts and the theme and the criteria, and that I wanted to thank her for making the standards so clear since clarity is the only thing people like me ever ask for, and then I said that while I appreciated the invitation, my next winter will be booked that same weekend, as I had just agreed to help the chamber host a public breakfast on achievement that centers the work and the teams rather than the personalities, and that we would be highlighting small businesses and city partners and creating real commitments in the room, and I left it at that, no gloating, no extra words, and I let the silence do its work. There was a pause long enough to hear her recalculating, and then she went for the angle I anticipated, the one where she suggests partnership. That perhaps the brunch could align with the chamber event or even co-host in some way so the audiences overlap and everyone wins, and I said that since the breakfast is open to the public, anyone can attend if they like, and that we are keeping it clean of private branding because we want people to leave with action items rather than photos, and that I would make sure to send her the link once registration opened, which was both polite and devastating if you are the kind of person who needs to control the guest list to feel relevant. She said she understood and that she was happy for me, and I thanked her, and we ended the call before anyone said something they could not walk back, and then, as if timed by a very organized universe, the chamber director's email landed with the subject line "Hold confirmed" and a draft release attached, and under the logistics was a short bold phrase listing the venue by name and the date by morning, and a placeholder for my quote, and right as I began to type the single sentence that would go out to the world about what achievement means, my phone lit again with Marla's name, which I let ring, because the next thing she heard would not be my voice, it would be the announcement. By mid-afternoon, the draft announcement was open on my screen with that small blank where my sentence should go, and instead of trying to be grand, I wrote the line I wish someone had said to me years ago, that achievement is work other people can use, not a costume you wear for photos, which read plain and steady on the page, and when I sent it back the director replied almost immediately that it was perfect and that they would publish at the top of the hour with registration live and the venue confirmed, and if I did not mind, they would add that I would moderate a short panel featuring the city team and 2 small business owners who had done the heavy lifting with us. And all I felt was relief because it kept the focus where it belonged while still making the point I needed to make, which was that the gate I had been shoved away from was never the only entrance, it was just the noisiest one. I took a breath, reread the release, and forwarded the link to our communications lead with a simple note about timing and cross-posting, then sent a text to the 2 owners to give them a heads up before their phones started buzzing. And finally, I drafted a short message to my aunt thanking her for calling me that morning and telling her that if she wanted a seat at the breakfast I would save one, not because I needed a witness, but because there are some people you want to be in the room when the story straightens itself. The first wave hit right on schedule. The chamber posted the announcement with my sentence lifted into the first paragraph. The venue tagged it with their little celebratory line that they paste under every big booking. The business association amplified it with a note about case studies and partnerships, and then the city account shared it with a plain statement about public outcomes and continuous improvement, which might sound dry to anyone who lives for drama, but to me read like a bell ringing in a clear room, because those are the lines that actually move money and time in the right direction. Registrations started coming in faster than anyone expected, and by the time the chamber added a second block of seats and a small scholarship fund link, my phone was steady with messages from people who had watched the interview the night before and were now connecting the dots, which I answered simply and politely until I reached a point where the best use of my day was to stop narrating and let the infrastructure do its job. So I set my auto-reply for the afternoon and went back to work on the panel questions, which I wanted to be sharp without being cruel, because the real satisfaction for me would never be a public takedown. It would be a room full of people making decisions that could not be rolled back by a toast. There is a part one have not told you yet because it needed to land at the right moment, and this is that moment. Tucked into the chamber logistics was the detail that the venue placed a firm hold on the main space for the morning slot and a backup on the secondary room in case of overflow, and because the venue runs tight schedules on high-traffic weekends, that meant other groups would be offered different days or different buildings, which is how I knew, with the quiet certainty that settles in when the truth is finally in your hand, that the brunch committee would be getting a very polite email about availability, and that someone, likely not even the manager but a junior staffer with a template, would suggest alternate timing or a smaller hall. Which is no tragedy, but in the world my cousin built out of status and optics, it reads like a downgrade, and I am not going to pretend that did not please me, because it did, not because I wanted them embarrassed, but because it felt like gravity had finally returned to a room where for years everything floated in the direction of whichever person talked the loudest. An hour after the announcement, a screenshot arrived from a friend who works events, showing a thread on which Marla had replied to the venue asking about the hold with a surprised punctuation and a question about whether there was flexibility. And then another friend, the one who knows everybody, wrote that the committee was scrambling and considering a switch to an afternoon slot with a new theme about community collaboration, which made me laugh in a way that was not mean, just satisfied. Because if they wanted collaboration, they could buy a ticket like everyone else and sit in the front row taking notes. I knew a direct confrontation would only feed the story she prefers to tell about me, so I chose something smaller and cleaner that still landed, which was to send Marla a straight friendly text with the registration link and a sentence about how the breakfast might be valuable for her planning since it centered measurable outcomes and cross-sector work, and that I would be moderating a panel with the people who actually executed the project she had referenced in her note last year about me being overwhelmed, and I closed with a cheerful line about public links being easy for sponsors to share, which cost me nothing and delivered the point without a single spike. She replied with a brief thanks and a note that she would check her schedule, followed by a much longer message about how the brunch would love to feature our story as its headline if I had time, and whether I could provide a short bio and a photo for the sponsor deck she was assembling, which put in my hands the very old urge to educate and smooth and keep peace, an urge I let die right there, because I typed back a single sentence saying that for the coming year my focus would be on the breakfast and on the follow-up commitments we were building out with the partners, and that I hoped her event went well and achieved whatever it set out to do, and then I put my phone down and did not look at it for an hour, which was maybe the most rebellious act of the whole month. When the chamber posted the sold-out banner that evening, which happened far faster than anyone projected, my mother called with a half laugh and half sigh because she finally understood the shape of the thing. And she asked if I was going to accept a speaking role at the brunch now that they were pivoting, and I said that sometimes the only way to change a rule is to stop playing the game that depends on it, and she was quiet for a long time and then said she was proud of me, which landed more deeply than any public message could, and after we hung up I sent a note to the panelists with the final question set and a short promise that I would hold the line on credit going to the people who did the work, And I felt that strange stillness that comes after a storm you did not start and did not have to end. You just had to stop standing under it. There is an epilogue forming already, because my aunt forwarded me a message from a cousin who wants to know how to get her team into the next round of training and whether the chamber will repeat the breakfast in the spring, and I wrote back that we will if the commitments turn into real action, and that I would help her navigate the application if she was serious. And then I closed the laptop and let the day be done. I do not know whether Marla will show up that morning and sit quietly in a room where she is not the host, and I do not know whether the brunch will transform into something useful or retreat into its familiar pose, and I do not need to know. Because the final move was never about forcing a lesson, it was about changing the terms so completely that the old insult no longer had anywhere to land, and if you want the truth, the only sound I wanted to hear in the end was the click of a calendar invitation that had my name on it for the thing I chose, not the thing I begged to enter, and that, more than any headline or toast or tag, is what winning finally felt like.